Breach items have been among some of the most sought-after and iconic uniques in Path of Exile history, but unfortunately, in more recent times, they've fallen behind the curve of power creep. Luckily, Path of Exile Crucible League looks to be changing this, with many of the items getting reworked, bringing new possibilities to the table. Each Breach Lord revolves around a central elemental theme, and their items do very much the same. In the past, this felt kind of limiting. Luckily, GGG's expanding these elemental themes by quite a bit, to include features that are a staple in modern Path of Exile. And so today's video is going to explore some of these newly reworked items, while speculating on what builds might find them useful. If you like items and item reworks, I recently made a video on the Abyss item rework that you might want to watch right after this one. And in a couple days, I'm going to be going over new and reworked masteries. If that interests you, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that upload. But now, let's begin to look at the reworks, beginning with Chayula's Chaos-themed items. Starting with the Dream and Nightmare Jewels. Previously, Dream Jewels offered a small amount of damage as extra chaos, and modified resistances in radius to give a chance for a charge on kill. Endurance for the red Dream, Frenzy for the green Dream, and Power for the blue Dream. In addition, the Nightmare Jewels did everything the Dream Jewels did, but also gave a chance to block attacks, spells, or suppress spell damage based on those resistances in radius. In Crucible League, the Dream Jewels are remaining largely unchanged, but the Nightmare Jewels are having their effects in regards to attack block, and spell suppression greatly amplified in exchange for the removal of the charge generation. Since that only applied on kill, I'm honestly not going to miss it. So if you're looking for block chance in the Ranger area, or suppress chance in the Templar area, these are definitely worth considering now. For example, depending on where you place the jewel between the Templar and Marauder area, you can get 10 to 17% suppression, which is a lot and could easily get your build capped. Now moving on to Chayula's weapons, Severed in Sleep or United in Dream, I'm sure the question you're wondering about is, does this kill Poison SRS? No, not at all. Poison SRS is completely fine, but the weapons now have different divergent purposes. Previously, you could use Severed in Sleep as a stand-in until you upgraded to United in Dream later. However, for Poison SRS, you'll now need to stick to United in Dream, as that's largely unchanged. It remains the minion poison weapon, giving an Envy aura for flat chaos damage and a chance for minions to poison on hit. On the other hand, Severed in Sleep now feels like it's intended for a chaos crit minion build, offering 60% chance for minions to wither on hit, and 5% crit multi per wither on an enemy, up to 75%. It'll be kind of interesting to see if any builds combine this with Iron Mass or Skeletal Atrophy to create a new minion archetype. What about Uul-Netol, the Breach Lord associated with Physical? Both of her shields, the Anticipation and the Surrender, were already pretty good, but they're getting a thematic change in 321, which makes them even better. Previously, the Anticipation gave a solid amount of armor if you've blocked recently, and now that's going to an absolutely massive 3000, making this an early game beast. It should absolutely be competitive with something like Lionized Remorse, depending on the price, though given the strength of a Surrender, this might end up being a bit too expensive as a starter item. The Surrender, on the other hand, now gives up to 500 life on block, which is completely absurd. If you're running around with a build that has around 5,000 life or less, that's 10% of your life as instant recovery each time you block. Want to play a melee build or Tenkiei caster? Definitely consider adding Surrender to your next build, as it's one of the best defensive shields outside of Aegis Aurora. Now, not every item can be a superstar, and so next up we have the Red Trail and Infinite Pursuit. Currently, both are very niche items, which are badly outclassed by modern boots, doubly so now that we have Eldritch influences. The Red Trail got a boost to its life and movement speed, which is nice, but in no way a game changer. The Infinite Pursuit, on the other hand, is more interesting, albeit still very niche. It now has Bleeding expires 75% slower on you, making it much easier to maintain self-bleeds, and prevents you from being stunned or poisoned while bleeding. Unfortunately, you kind of often get stun immunity from being a Slayer if you're going for this archetype, and while poison immunity is nice, Slayer Leech is kind of already poison immunity, so I don't see this getting any use in the near future. But who knows, a lot changes in PoE, and someday this could genuinely be awesome. And then finally, we have Uul-Netol's Kiss and Uul-Netol's Embrace, another item which is currently very niche and almost completely unused. Part of the reason that no one used Uul-Netol's Kiss is it just didn't have enough damage. Now, at 504 DPS, it's a basic two-handed weapon. Having the inbuilt curse on hit and 200% increased damage for exerted attacks means it's a pretty nice starter weapon if you can buy it cheaply off trade. Unfortunately, outside of Bone Nova, Uul-Netol's Embrace didn't really change, so I don't think anyone's going to use the weapon in 321. But who knows, maybe the tree will change my mind. Then we have Xoph, the Breachlord of Fire, who has one of the items I'm most excited for. Though I'll get into that shortly. First up, Xoph's Inception, an item which was all but useless without being upgraded. It just had so little damage. But now it's gotten a complete rework. The bow tops out at 326 PDPS, while retaining the 20% of Fizz's extra fire. This means it should scale pretty well on a conversion build. The measly 20 to 30 life on kill is replaced with a generous 2 to 300. That won't save you from any bosses, but will feel absolutely incredible while mapping. And it now has projectiles pierce all burning enemies, and arrows deal 30 to 50 added fire damage for each time they've pierced. This got a lot more usable due to the greater availability of projectiles on the passive tree, and even without the extra damage from piercing enemies, it's a good enough starter bow that you should absolutely consider it. Plus, the built-in pierce means tons of free clear so long as you're reliably igniting enemies. Now in the intro, I mentioned I was excited for one of the reworks, and that is the Formless Flame and Formless Inferno. Previously, these were a niche and often overlooked defensive item. Formless Flame keeps the affix that armor is increased by overcapped fire res, though unfortunately you do lose the 8% of fizz taken as fire. It's solid, but still pretty niche. Where things get really interesting is the Formless Inferno. It's been completely reworked and looks amazing. It now has socketed skills are supported by level 30 Infernal Legion, and minion life is increased by overcapped fire resistance. If you get one with a +2 minion gem corruption, you could totally enable something like Popcorn SRS, Popcorn Skeletons, or much more. At minimum, you're getting 75% increased minion life, which is no joke. Plus, Infernal Legion could give you a minion RF build, since at level 30 it has a jaw-dropping 7,856.2 base damage. And finally, the Amulet. Xoph's Blood already saw a lot of use, since it's a great way to get Avatar Fire, and due to having a divination card, it's pretty freely available. But Xoph's Heart felt completely useless. But now, Xoph's Heart covers nearby enemies in Ash, which could be quite strong depending on which version of nearby is used. The TLDR is that there's 3 distances in PoE referred to as nearby. 10 units, think super close to melee range, which won't help here. A more medium one, about a third of your screen, that could work as long as you're good at your positioning. Or the largest range, which is about 100 units and nearly hits the edge of your screen. If it's that one, the Amulet could see a lot of use and would be a great choice for any fire build that doesn't scale off of gem levels. If you know about any of Tool's items, it's probably Pandemonious. But after 321, you'll have a reason to remember a few more. Toolfall was always stuck as a weaker version of Void Battery or Shimmeron, but in Crucible League, the unupgraded version Toolborn has been completely reworked and Toolfall itself has been significantly buffed. Toolborn in particular is going to be a very interesting weapon to consider, due to the massive damage it offers and the extreme ease of use. The old version required you to kill a frozen enemy to generate power charges, or in other ways rely on power charges for most of your damage. But the new version offers a large amount of flat cold dispels, regardless of power charges, and increases the effect of your exposure. This gives a massive amount of exposure, especially if the effect stacks. Toolfall, on the other hand, drains your power charges upon reaching max, but now adds 50 to 70 cold damage dispels per power charge. That's right, per power charge, per Toolfall. That has to make it one of the highest damage weapons in the game, even counting weapons made for physical attack builds. So this is definitely an item to watch if you're planning to play a Hierophant caster or anyone else who can stack up a lot of minimum power charges. To make this even more effective, set your character up so that your minimum power charges are always 1 below your maximum. That way, with power charge on crit, you get to loop the last charge to generate frenzy charges as well. Moving on, we have the Perfect Form. A breach item with amazing potential, but it just hasn't kept up with power creep in recent years. The reworked version now gives 50% chance to suppress spell damage, evasion rating is increased by overcapped cold resistance, and the acrobatics keystone, which still isn't great. Having a 100% chance to suppress spell damage halves the damage you take from most bosses. 75% chance to dodge spells means you take no damage, or all the damage, and simply isn't worth it. Especially because, without any forms of mitigation, you'll be one-shot the minute your dodge fails you. Snowblind Grace, on the other hand, was reworked and got a lot more interesting, especially when your build has poor access to armor. It gives 50% increased Arctic Armor buff effect and 10 to 15% dexterity, while also inheriting the Arctic Armor has no reservation that was previously on Perfect Form. This way, you can use Arctic Armor for your physical mitigation in place of armor, or to make a small amount of armor far more effective against the physical damage you take. Lastly, Halcyon got a change, turning 15 to 20% increased cold damage into freeze proliferation. Unfortunately, this is redundant with Blast Freeze, the Cluster Notable, or the Eldritch Glove implicit. And even with a freeze duration mod, it requires too much investment to give up your next slot, so I don't see this getting much use. Finally, let's talk about items with the affinity for lightning, belonging to Esh the Forked Thought. Esh's Mirror used to be used in some kind of mapper auto-bomber setups. You'd want to shock a bunch of monsters to stack up the 1 to 10 lightning damage for each shocked enemy killed recently. The shock reflection would be a nice defensive layer, but definitely wasn't part of a core build. This type of thing was popular around Incursion League, and has since completely fallen out of favor, because as it turns out, only being able to kill trash mobs wasn't the best build idea when bosses and rare enemies became more relevant. With a rework, I could actually see Esh's Mirror getting some use again, because the shock reflection has been replaced with shock proliferation, a stat that's far more usable. The base stats on the item have also been improved, though they still aren't incredible. The upgraded version remains unchanged and likely won't see use. Moving on to Choir of the Storm, this is another thing that used to be a staple in lightning builds, but it fell out of favor since it was far easier to get crit chance, and giving up +1 gems for a level 30 lightning bolt still isn't a choice you're going to make. Yes, moving from level 20 to level 30 did significantly increase lightning bolt's damage, but lightning bolt still doesn't do all that much since it gets no access to support gems. Voice of a Storm, on the other hand, is far more usable now, especially for attack builds that don't need the +1 gem from their amulet and don't have good access to the lightning mastery for non-crits are lucky. With recent support for non-crit builds on the rise, this should find a really solid place in Path of Exile. For example, you can use Precise Technique and combine it with Voice of a Storm to have a non-crit lightning build where your attacks are always lucky to take advantage of lightning's extended damage range. And then last but not least, the changes to Hand of Thought in Motion or Hand of Wisdom in Action. This one excites me, because every version of Int Stacker has been a lightning build, just like how Dex Stack is cold and Strength Stack is fire. Replica Alberon's Warpath brought the ability to Strength Stack for chaos damage, and now Hand of Thought in Motion brings the ability to Dex Stack for lightning damage, in addition to the base being improved from a Blinder to an Imperial Claw, making it much more usable. This combined with the new Claw Masteries in 321 make me curious about how a deck-stacking Venom Jar character would look using Hand of Thought in Motion, something I may very well experiment with or theorycraft in the near future. While not all of the reworked Breach items are good, I do like the direction GGG is taking with these changes, making sure there's a clear differentiation between the purpose of an unupgraded and upgraded item, and making the unupgraded ones usable in their own right. There's a lot of exciting things to consider here. And personally, some of the items I'm most looking forward to building around include Formless Inferno, Hand of Thought in Motion, and Tollfall. But what about you? Which of these items do you plan to use, or would you most like to see theory crafted? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, or got any build ideas, remember to leave a like as well. And before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link down in the description. If you want something else to watch, maybe check out my thoughts on the Abyss items, which were also reworked very recently. Or you can check out my guide to defensive layering, and some ideas on what I might want to league start in 321. Or if you want, you can always go with a recommendation that's on screen right now. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.